Hello, and welcome to Comics Tuesday. Today, we're going to be talking about superhero origin stories. So in the whole sea of origin stories that are out there, there are a few standbys that are frequently reused. And basically those are, our hero is some sort of an alien. He's from someplace other than our Earth. And because of that, is just more powerful. You also have a character that used to be normal, just like you and me, until some radioactive or magical whatever did some stuff to him, and now he's super. And then you have some characters that aren't super at all, but they have lots of money and weapons and stuff and can go out superheroing because of that. But those are the basics. Those get reused all the time. There are exceptions, of course. A couple of my favorites are characters who are basically human, but for some reason or another, they're born with superpowers. And also, the normal people who don't have access to all the money and weapons and stuff. So, characters like Shang-Chi or, I'm just going to say it, Daredevil. But a good origin story serves a couple basic functions. And the front and foremost of these is that by the end of the origin story, you have to have created the character that you're going to want to use in your stories. That's the whole reason you do it. But then also, you got to motivate the character. You got to lay down some of their characteristics. And teach us who they are right there in the origin story. And then any time that character's written from then on, you have some idea of how they act when in character. And if the origin story is done well enough, most or all of that character's stories from then on can kind of connect back to it in some way. For example, perhaps the same events that create a hero also created his nemesis. But however you do it, it's got to be believable. And now, I know we're talking about superheroes here, so when I say believable, I don't mean that any of this stuff could really happen. What I mean is characters. Whatever's going on, the character should always react in a way that's relatable. And that's what makes the story believable. So that's how you do it. Now I'm going to give you a handful of my favorite origin stories. First off, of course, is Captain Marvel, both Marvel and Carol Danvers. Marvel, as far as how he got his powers, is one of the basic ones that I mentioned earlier. He's just an alien born with his powers. But what I think is really interesting is they did the same thing with his name. And I find that really creative because his name is Marvel. And he was a captain when he came to Earth. So he goes around and starts saving people. Yeah, Captain Marvel. Sounds like a superhero. And then you have the other Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, who, before she got her powers, was just a normal person with her normal everyday job of United States Air Force fighter pilot. And in that line of work, she worked with Marvel multiple times. And so that brought her into the situation in which Marvel's villain, Yon-Rogg, was threatening her life with some strange alien technology. And so when Marvel comes in to save her, the machine explodes, and at that moment, Marvel's genetics are copied onto Carol's body. And from then on, she had the same powers as him. And I really can't think of any example of any other hero's origin story being very similar to that. So it always strikes me as the most unique. And of course, there's Kyle Rayner. And I've talked about his origin before. So right now I'm just going to give you the long and the short of it, which is Hal Jordan goes bad. The Guardians are desperate to replace him, so they pick just a random guy to give their ring to. And that's Kyle Rayner. And he's an awesome Green Lantern. And I love the everyman aspect of that. And the X-Men. The X-Men is a really beautiful one. Back when Stan Lee was first writing X-Men, he was trying to think of some way to give his new super team their powers. And he wasn't coming up with anything. So he says, screw it, they were born with their powers. And it ended up being a really brilliant decision. I love Stan's honesty in telling us that. Stan the man. The last couple we got here are Doctor Strange and Spiderman. And I'm grouping these together because the most important part of their origin story, in my opinion, isn't even that they got their powers. It's how well they're established as characters. How well you can know them as people right there in their origin story. Because Doctor Strange is trying to recover from a physical injury. But in the process, he becomes a totally different kind of person because he has to open his mind up to all these new things. And he transitions from being a surgeon to a sorcerer. That's a really big change, and they pull it off very well. And then Spider-Man learns day one that because he has his powers, he has to use them responsibly to do good every moment of every day, or something horrible could happen. And he learned that the hard way. And once you've done the origin story, you have to keep going. And there's this tendency that writers like to have, where they all the time are going back to the origin story. But instead of just going forward from there, a lot of people like to go back and change it and rearrange it and mess with it. And mess with the origin. When that happens, it could obviously go very bad. And sometimes there's good ones too. And so, I think when it works out well, pretty much the reasons why that happens is they take elements that are in the character story already, and they just kind of just connect them together, and they use that to fill in some blank spaces that are already there in the origin. The example I have for this is the Flash. Alright? The Flash is working in his lab with some chemicals, gets struck by lightning, and it gives him super speed. But beyond that, years later, when he's showing his nephew Wally what happened to him, how he got his powers, wouldn't you know it, lightning bolt comes in and hits Wally and gives him the same powers as Barry. If you're anything like me, that stretches your belief just a little bit. So what they finally add in is at the end of Barry's life, he's running everywhere and every wind, and he runs through time and space, and he strikes Wally, splashing the chemicals on him, giving him his powers. Does the same with himself, and so it connects everything together. It's suddenly not such a random coincidence that both Barry and Wally had the same thing happen to them. It was Barry's doing. But when changing the origin turns badly, it's usually because they take the pre-existing story and it explains things well enough. It's a good read. It doesn't have holes in it. It doesn't leave you asking any questions. It works. They take a story like that, and for whatever reason, they just add to it anyway. They take some extra stuff and they just put it in there. And so my example for a character that's had that done is Spider-Man. Spider-Man's original origin is this. There's a radioactive spider, it bites Peter Parker, gives him spider powers, boom, he's a superhero. But then years later, we find out that there's this ephemeral spider god who chose for Peter to have powers, and so the spider bites him. Yeah, okay, I guess. But then later, we find out that the spider that bit Peter didn't just bite him, bit some other people too. Silk. But there you have it. There's a lot of fun to be had with origin stories. It's just interesting to see all these characters, and what they have in common is they all came from somewhere. And to me, that's one of the most fun things in comic books, is just finding out how these super characters became so super. But that's it for this week. And now it's time for the viewer question of the week, which is, which superhero movie are you looking forward to most? For me, it's Captain Marvel. It cannot come soon enough. And I swear, if Spider-Man ends up in it, I might just drop dead. Anyway, leave your answer down in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you here next week for Comics Tuesday. And on next Comics Tuesday, we talk about the best superhero hair. Thanks for watching.